The windows were open to let in whatever fresh breezes they could, but the air in the royal apartments was none the less stifling. Having spent more than a year living in the desert, Delnamal had thought himself inured to heat, but the climate here in Alta seemed far more oppressive than that of Women'swell, where the air was bone dry, and even in the worst heat of summer, the nights were cool. Here in Alta, the nearby sea added such a heavy dose of humidity that the air felt thick as porridge. "Do sit down and eat," his wife Kylie urged, and he reluctantly moved away from the window to join her at the table where a small supper had been laid for them. Kylie's face glowed with perspiration, and the few locks of hair that had escaped her headdress were plastered wetly to her neck, but she seemed to accept the discomfort with her customary serenity, a serenity Delnamal envied as he tried futilely to push up the sleeves of his doublet. "How I loathe civilian clothes," he muttered. Custom required he set aside the comfortable shirts and trousers he'd worn in the military and donned the doublet and breeches of a gentleman, with all the concomitant adornment. But he longed for the days when he could breathe inside his clothing. Kylie smiled at him as she served herself a helping of stewed vegetables and ignored the beautifully roasted whole fish that took pride of place in the center of the table. Delnamal frowned. "I should have asked the cook to fillet it for you," he said, shaking his head at himself. Their marriage was in its infancy, and he was still getting used to dealing with his wife's unique challenges in life. It would be no easy feat to avoid fish bones when one could not see them. Kylie shrugged. "I am used to making do, and I'm not overly hungry." "Well, you don't have to make do anymore," he said, as he portioned out a serving of fish, inspecting it carefully for bones before sliding it onto her plate. "I think I got them all, but be cautious anyway." Her mouth quirked. Delnamal was still learning how to read her expressions. He'd never realized before how much he'd relied on a person's eyes to give away what she was feeling. But he thought he saw mild reproach. "I have eaten fish before. I know to be careful. And I could have served myself if I'd actually wanted the fish." Delnamal winced and wished he were more at ease with his wife. It had been abundantly clear from the first moment that Kylie was far more self-sufficient than most people gave her credit for, and that she found it irritating, if not downright hurtful, when people offered unwanted help. He'd vowed not to be one of those people, yet it was astonishingly easy to fall into that trap. "My apologies," he said, serving himself while wrestling with the guilt that was becoming his constant companion of late. In Women'swell, Kylie had gained her freedom by marrying him, escaping the scrutiny of her father and stepmother, and Rosenholm high society. And then he had abruptly snatched it back from her by accepting the regency and moving them to Alta, where her blindness would once again be treated as a source of shame. To make matters worse, he couldn't even be a proper husband to her, for his heart had remained in Women'swell with Chanlic's and the child she carried. A pang of longing struck him, but he shoved it aside and tried to stay present with the woman he had married. Just because he did not, could not love her, didn't absolve him of his duties as a husband. He shoved some fish into his mouth and promptly stabbed himself in the cheek with a fish bone. Kylie smirked when he extracted it from his mouth. Her worldly vision might not function, but with her mind's eye always open, she could see the aura of Ro that surrounded every living thing, which allowed her to see many gestures, such as digging a fishbone out of one's mouth. "You seem out of sorts," Kylie commented as she picked at her dinner. "Will you think me nosy if I ask why?" "You're my wife," he said. "You're allowed to be nosy." He put a teasing lilt into his voice, although in truth her perspicacity often unnerved him. She shouldn't know him well enough yet to see that he was out of sorts. He pulled at the neckline of his doublet, which was soaked with sweat, and clinging unpleasantly. He should have asked for a cold supper, but had been too distracted to think of it.